Hello, Dr. Jah. How are you, sir?
How's it going, brother?
Good, good, good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey, it's great to have you back. You were here earlier today and you had a great conversation on the panel. I thought what we might do is we might expand on that. You're
Yeah.
very, very broad. You've got a lot of different interests and a lot of passions, et cetera. So I just want to have a lot of conversation with you about that. And
Yeah.
so something struck me, which of course which I'm very fond of, is this idea of focus. I mean, you brought up the idea that let's not kid ourselves about certain things, right? What's important, what's not. And in a world of limited resources, time being one of them, money being another, brain power being another, and these critical issues, it's really important to focus on what matters. And let's not kid ourselves. There's some things that are nice to haves and some things that are absolutely critical, right? So I'd
Exactly.
love for you to expand on that a little bit. About where do you think our focus should be? What are the
Yeah.
critical things? And I guess if you were king for a day, where would you point us? Where would you direct us? What would we focus on to get the maximum value and to move space exploration, the commercialization, and the defensive space forward?
Nice. Okay.
That would
So
be great. Yeah, whatever your thoughts are on that, where should we focus?
cool. So look, I think first and foremost, one of the things that I'm seeing in the news, especially, is just a lot of tit for tat, meaning people that are shaking their fists at the heavens, saying, "Yeah, China's doing this, Russia's doing that, the U.S. is doing this, and SpaceX is doing blank, so and so is doing something else," and it just seems like a lot of complaints about things, but um, there's no common pool of evidence uh, by which people can draw conclusions. And one of the things that I saw very recently was, China went to the United Nations and complained that the Starlink satellites were a hazard to their space station and that sort of stuff. And the US came back saying, yeah, when we look at our evidence, really there was no hazard. And it's back to, people have different bodies of evidence and they're all making decisions based on these different bodies of evidence. And as long as we have different bodies of evidence from which to make decisions, we're never going to come up with like a consistent set of space practices. We can't, because we're going to draw conclusions that are going to be very different from each other oftentimes. And so I think one of the main areas of focus has to be, how do we bring data and information together in such a way to make it widely accessible to the most global pool of people as possible, so that if we can draw conclusions from a common pool of evidence, even if the conclusions differ, at least the evidence is consistent. And it gives us a basis for conversation and discussion. And then we can talk about, well, why did your conclusion kind of differ from mine, given that we were seeing kind of the same thing? That's a conversation to have. But as long as we have different eyes on the sky and that sort of stuff, and we're not sharing evidence with each other, I think it's to the detriment of everybody.
Well said. And so the lens through which we view the world is important. We can come to different conclusions if our lens is skewed. And of course, you're saying if the data, the evidence that we're looking at is different, or we define terms differently, or to a certain degree, some things mean some things to others, et cetera. And then, of course, there's this notion of bias. I mean, you could see China or any country advocating for its position, whether it's true or not. They're trying to maybe get an edge, et cetera, or whatever, and we can be guilty of that, et cetera. So we can have country bias or whatever, right? So we can have our own views. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm with
absolutely.
you. If we're talking the same language and if we're looking at the same things, then we can then have a reasonable debate about our conclusions. But we can't if
Exactly.
those first two things aren't true. We can't have a reasonable discussion. I think
Yeah.
that's a really important point.
I mean, let me give you another quick example, really quick. Um, One of the things, so some time ago, a couple years ago, we talked to the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and there's one convention, one treaty on registering objects in space. And basically, I read this thing. It's not a long read, from 1972, and basically it says, if you're a launching state, and it defines what that means, um, register your object once it's on orbit. Register your object as soon as it's practicable. And so I talked to the UN and I said, hey, um, how are people doing with this stuff? And they said, yeah, we're actually unsure how states party to the treaty are actually interpreting and implementing this. And one of the things that I tell people is, you can't manage what you don't know. and you can't know what you don't measure. So it's all about measurements. So we decided to take in all the data from the UN Space Object Registry and measure from the time the thing's on orbit to the time they actually made a submission to the UN, which is how do different countries interpret as soon as it's practicable? And I can tell you, some countries on average take 5 years after the thing's been on orbit to hit send to an email to the UN to tell them that the thing's been on orbit like 5 years ago. My guess is that whenever they came up with this thing in 1972, their intent wasn't wait 5 years before you send this stuff in, but some countries are interpreting it that way. So the thing is, if we can collect the measurements and the evidence, and it's a common pool of evidence, we can see how people are interpreting, implementing things, and then we can kind of talk to these people. Now that you have the analysis, you can now go to these countries and say, hey, by the way, we see that on average it takes you 5 years to just send us the information. Any chance you could send it within the first couple months? Like, I think that was the intent of this sort of
practical
thing. Yeah. You know, so I mean, that's the sort of thing that needs to happen, man.
Okay. So one of the root causes of that has got to be in the incentive to do it, and the motivation on the behalf of the person who's being sort of self-compliant or not. So this compliance issue has to do with motivation, et cetera, and what are the compensation or rewards? You know, am I punished for this? Am I rewarded for it? You know, if you stake a claim in a mining claim, you want to get your claim in as quickly as possible, right? So if you don't give your data to us quickly enough, if there is some sanctioning body that says, like in here, the FCC or whatever, you don't get to put anything up in space because we don't know where your stuff is, and we don't want to run into it, and we don't want your stuff running into other people's stuff. So there has to be some sort of accountability and some mechanism for that, right?
Absolutely. So here's the thing. I'm all about trying to do. If we really want space safety, security, and sustainability, as it were, the three S's, I try to measure myself in achieving those things by what am I doing that's making space more transparent? In other words, you know, what is it? Who does it belong to? What can it do? What am I doing to make space more predictable? Where are things going to be over the next hours, minutes, days, months? And in any common situation, how are two different space actors going to respond to that? So there's cultural nuance there. And then the last one is, can we develop a body of evidence to hold people accountable for their behaviors? So transparency, predictability, and accountability is where I try to focus what I do. But I guess to your point with incentivizing, you know, I'm working with a doctoral student out of Denmark. He's on Fulbright fellowship with me at UT Austin, and we're actually looking at right of way. Who gets right of way in space? Just like there's right of way in other domains, there probably should be a right of way in space. And I would say, look, if you register your object very soon and you're very transparent, you behave in a way that makes you very transparent, you behave in a way that makes you very predictable, and you behave in a way that allows us to hold you accountable for your behavior, you should get right of way in space. And if somebody is on a crash course with you, sounds like you get the right of way. You shouldn't have to use your precious propellant to move out of the way. This other person should probably do that. I mean, that's just like an example of
That's a very practical way to do it. I mean, if you don't register your car and you get on the highway and we don't know where it's at, et cetera, and you run into somebody versus somebody who says, my car's registered, I'm legal, I'm licensed, you know, my car is, you know, chip shape, whatever, then exactly. Yeah, they should be given preferential treatment over a random actor.
Absolutely. You bet.
Well said. So what I love talking about you is you usually have you not only point out the problem, right, but practical solutions, some sort of prescription for the ill. And what we try to avoid here, and you do too all the time, is this innovation theater stuff, right, where we say, gosh golly, it's really important. The Chinese are coming. Oh, the Chinese are here. Oh, the Chinese went past us. Okay. After a while, you say, great, now what?
Exactly.
What do we do? And we always talk about that with regard to innovation. So, but you've been working with some very interesting companies, several of them. You advise and coach and mentor a lot of folks, and one of them's Privateer, and I think we're all pretty much familiar with Privateer. But are there any others that you find particularly interesting who have solutions that are doing something valuable, addressing some of these problems around debris in space, sustainability, tracking, sensing, any of those sorts of things? Are there any solutions on the horizon that you think we need to focus on on the most? And are there any of the companies that you work with that you're particularly interested in?
Yeah, so I'll put it this way. I believe I believe that we should be incentivizing anybody who has an idea. We should try to find a way for their idea to be manifest, and people should have options. I'm all about more options. I feel that some people are more towards monopolies. They want to be the Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all, one technology to solve it all, which is complete BS. That doesn't make sense. Options is really what makes sense. A plethora of choices is what makes sense for a variety of reasons. And look, even if you have multiple companies that are doing a very similar thing, it's great to have independent answers to a common question, because you can then check the statistical consistency. Are all these things kind of telling me the same thing? Is one thing telling me something very different? And if so, why may that be? Um, confidence comes as a result of multiple things and trying to inform you of something, and you can then check the statistical consistency of things. So in terms of companies, look, Deorbit, I find very interesting. Kahan Space, Slingshot, Astroscale, all these folks that are trying to, solve the debris problem and try in terms of like actually rendezvousing and doing something about it. Others that are trying to monitor space, others that are trying to improve our ability to predict where things are going to be over time. I think all these people have something very valuable to bring to the table. I just wish that all of them saw that it's in the best interest for all of them to try to coexist versus trying to find ways to like bludgeon each other, which seems to be the flavor du jour.
So I spent a lot of time in mergers and acquisitions, and I like to say that I've got too many enemies, not enough friends. Right?
Right.
So in this world where there are all of these people trying to maybe solve similar or maybe even the same problem, and they're competitive, and because they are, the profit motive is causing that. But if we were a little bit more mature or wise, we might figure out if I partner with this other company, maybe we too can fight against all of them. And if you have any thoughts or words of wisdom about how to encourage some of these companies, because you talk to a lot of them, you advise them, et cetera, I imagine you advise them, find some partners, find some biddies, some business partners, find a way to partner with other people so that you're cooperative, complementary
Leverage
without
each
being
other.
competitive.
Exactly, man. Exactly. So this whole idea of just being able to leverage each other. I don't want to, for when I was very young, I personally wanted to be an indispensable partner to everybody in the community. I said, that's who I want to be. And then I quickly realized that's going to end my life. Because the thing is, there's too much. I can't, I felt, wow, I'm spread so thin. People are calling me at 1 o'clock in the morning. They're thinking the universe is giving me what I asked for. I don't think that companies want to be I'll solve all your problems. That's like stupid. It's like just what you said. I think being able to talk to companies like, look, here's the thing that you're really good at. I'm really good at this thing. Here's a little bit of overlap, but we can leverage, we can complement each other. We can build something, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts kind of stuff. Like, I think all those things make a lot of sense, man. And look, when I look at a platform like an iPhone, there are so many apps that you can get for an iPhone. So many apps that do the same thing. I don't know. The iPhone comes with Safari. It comes with Mail. Some people don't like that. They like Chrome. They like Outlook. That's fine. But it's like, why? I've never seen a battle between Safari and Outlook or Safari and Chrome or whatever, right? It's like, just give people options.
Yeah, well, let's take that further. I think, as an investor myself, I would say if I've got a company that I've invested in, I would want them to look at the competitive landscape, look at the other people that are like them, and say, who is my enemy and who also could be my friend?
Yeah.
And if we want to get your trajectory going faster, is there a large company you could partner with that maybe not
Yeah.
wouldn't gobble you up and throw you in a corner, because that happens, right?
It does. Yeah.
Okay, we have to guard against that. But are there partners who are true partners? And is there
Exactly.
somebody that has a piece of the puzzle you don't have?
Right.
And could 1 + 1 = 7 or 10 or whatever, right?
Exactly. You bet.
And I don't see a lot of that. I just spoke with 3 companies last week who are
Mm-hmm.
all focused on the space debris problem. Each
Mm-hmm.
has a different solution, one a hardware solution, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
I said to them, "Have you talked to these people?" And one of them said, "Who are they?" And I go, "Well,
It's horrible, right?
you got to know who's in your space."
It's crazy, man.
Yeah. And this is a very well-known person. This person's known in the space community. So well, they're doing the same thing you're doing,
Right.
and you have. So why don't you guys talk?
And
Why don't you?
I have to tell you something, and I did this. Here's something. It's going to seem tangential, but it's actually kind of getting to something similar. Whenever somebody, back when I was at the Air Force Research Lab and I worked alongside people at MIT Lincoln Lab and these sorts of things, and um, whenever I was at these technical conferences and somebody said, "Oh, I'm really awesome. Technically, I'm at the top of my game. I'm world expert." The first question that I would ask them is, where does your technology or where does your algorithm fail? And if they couldn't come up with an answer, I knew that they were not credible. Because the thing is, if you're really invested in solving the problem, you're pretty rigorous about it. You know where your stuff doesn't work. You
But
know
you're
where
good
it's
about it.
been untested.
You're
If
self-aware.
you're self-aware, man, if you really want to solve this problem, to your point, you know who the competition is. You know who's trying to solve the problem because you want to solve the problem, and you're trying to, like, right? Step number one, literature search. And any sort of research, the first thing that you do is a lit search to see who's worked on this stuff before. So that's the equivalent. You talking to this dude and this person not having a clue who this other, that is not doing a lit search. And that says you don't respect the problem.
Well said. God, you get me thinking, and then I forget what I was gonna, where you took me to, right?
Yeah, brother.
Um, so this is really an important conversation. If we truly want to have America and its allies stay ahead, get ahead, innovate, make the entire world a better place, then especially if we think about competing with the Chinese, who have 1.4 billion really smart people, who are
Really
really
smart.
serious, really
Yes.
smart people, really serious, really
Yep.
hardworking, really.
Yep.
Then it can't be America alone.
It can't.
It has to be all the countries, et cetera,
That's right.
that collaborate, and it has to be all the companies within them, and it has to be
Yes.
all the companies working with the government.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say we have an all-volunteer military. We also have an all-volunteer economy.
Yes.
And herding cats is hard, right? Well, the Chinese don't have that problem. Thou shalt help your government. Thou shalt collaborate. Thou shalt work together.
Right.
Or bad things happen to you.
Yeah.
I don't want to live in that environment. But
Exactly. That's
there's
right,
something
man.
to be learned from the Chinese in that regard.
Yes. And the thing is, look, I've been there. I've been invited to give short courses there at Beijing Institute of Technology and the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. I went there, and one of the first things that I noticed is that they have a lot of smart people. And in fact, the questions that the students were asking me, they knew more about my research than my own research team at my campus in the US. People tend to be very dismissive. It's like, oh, Chinese or they're not that good, or they just like steal our stuff to like, you don't land the rover successfully on Mars by stealing technology. You can't just copy and paste that stuff. You actually have to know what you're doing. So I just think that we need to accept excellence across humanity, not just in America, and try to understand the cultural nuances. We don't have to get along on every account, but we need to get along some.
Yeah, well, you pointed out this idea of knowing where you fail.
Exactly.
America has to follow that same logic and that same approach, which is, where do we fall? Let's acknowledge competitive disadvantage.
Right.
Where we have it. We have competitive disadvantage in a number of areas where they are superior to us.
Yes.
And,
Big
and
time.
Not that they're catching up, not they're about to get to us,
right.
Not that they're at parity, that they are ahead of us.
Yeah, exactly.
And that has we've been doing this for 12 years. And for 12 years, we've been saying the Chinese are coming, and then we changed, and we said the Chinese are here, and then we said the Chinese are ahead, and they are in many areas. As a matter of fact, in large part because of COVID and the economic downturn in the United States, the Chinese economy has gone up, and they're going to reach parity with us in terms of the size of their economy 20 years faster than we thought.
Yeah.
They're going to be bigger than us very, very soon economically.
Of course. Yep.
With all of their people. So
yeah,
this is a wake-up call, I think, and I appreciate your sounding the gong on the wake-up call. Let's not kid ourselves. Like you said earlier, let's focus on what really matters. Let's pay attention. let's collaborate, and we have to redouble our efforts. So, hearing you say that, and you say this sort of thing a lot about collaboration, cooperation, self-awareness is really important.
You bet.
Um, if you had $1 billion, well, let's give you more money. If you had $1 trillion, right, and you could throw it out at any one of these big problems that we have in space. We talk about sensing, imagery. We talk about ISR. We talk about all of that. We talk about launch, right? We talk about debris. Okay, so if you were to pick where we would focus that $1 trillion, is there a particular area that keeps you up at night the most that is going to keep us from being successful in space that we should throw our resources at?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound kind of maybe nerdy or whatever, but I like throwing resources at removing ignorance. That's where I would invest. Because, back to the thing that I said before, you can have a company, Acme Incorporated, saying, "Hey, I have, this sensing technology. Here's what I think is going on in space, all this other stuff." That's a biased answer just based on their sensors. Some other company might have another thing. It's just based on it's all these disparate kind of biased opinions. Every one of them tends to be very confirmation biased, but the aggregate of confirmation biased beliefs really represents the uncertainty. And the thing is, I love trying to find ways to remove ignorance. One of the things that I tell people is that I consider myself a data renaissance. And as a data renaissance, my block of marble is ignorance, and I use evidence to chip away stuff. I like to remove ignorance, and my hope is that if I've removed enough ignorance, the truth emerges as the trapped statue of David sort of thing. So I would throw my resources at ignorance removal. How do I come up with a framework that allows people to participate from all over, kind of like a Waze application, right? The users get to actually put in input and give information that can reconcile inconsistencies, that can identify things that clearly are prejudiced and remove ignorance along the way, so that in the process of removing ignorance, we can come up with something that's truer. That's where I would focus the resources. I know it sounds philosophical, but that's what I do.
Well, so that's what we love, and it makes me think I'd love to have you come back and have you have a conversation about this sort of things with the people who can make a difference, the decision makers, the influencers. So if you were to have a dream team, if it was Elvis and Gandhi and MLK and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sinatra, who would you have to dinner thing, right? If you were to have a group of people, influencers, where would they come from? Would it be someone in the military? Would it be somebody in academia? Would it be an entrepreneur? If you could have a conference or a discussion just on this, how do we remove ignorance? How do we get smarter? How do we focus? If you could have that, because I'd love to have you come back, and instead of you being interviewed, I'd love for you to direct a conversation like this. But who would you recommend if you could have a conversation with anybody? Who do you find interesting, and who do you think is sort of on the right track?
The first conversation that I would have is with people of First Nations, indigenous people across the globe. Because here's the thing, they live in existential crisis every day, and the only way that they survive is by having a successful conversation with their environment. And even indigenous people that share a common water resource or land resource, they have figured out, even if they don't agree with each other, even if they fight with each other, they have come up with a mechanism to share the resource because their lives depend on it. So how to harmonize, how to achieve harmony when it comes to sustainability. So the first conversation that I would have is with indigenous people, and I say, hey, look, you've been around for consistently for 60,000 years, like the Aborigine or the Inuit. How do you do it? Tell me the stories that have been passed on to you, and how do you survive in such a harsh environment? How do you make it? I would want to have a conversation with them, and then invite CEOs and all that other stuff to listen into what they have to say.
Well, I love that. I think we suffer from not having an existential threat or not perceiving one.
That's right.
You know,
Exactly. That's right.
hardship makes you stronger
Big time.
and smarter and more adaptable. And because we're wealthy and well fed and well housed and all that sort of stuff, we don't seem to have the sense of urgency or the sense of focus that somebody who deals with existential threat
Yeah, I think the thing is that we are in denial that we are facing an existential threat. To your point, we are denying that because we're under this illusion of, yep, I can order from Grubhub. I have a decent home or whatever. My kids go to a decent school, and so we feel that we're independent from the events happening on other parts of the globe, people that are living in disfavorable conditions. We believe ourselves independent from them. Oh, that's them. It's not my problem. That is the illusion that is feeding into this denial that we actually, all of us, are in this existential crisis and we're just not accepting it, which to me is very dangerous.
Right. Well, an Inuit would tell you when a storm is coming,
Exactly.
right? And prepare for it,
That's right.
like their life depended on it.
Exactly. Because it
Well said.
does.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think we'll leave it with that. That's great, and I can't thank you enough for participating with us twice today, and you're coming back again today. I always
Thank
love your
you.
insights.
Thank you.
Uh, we'll be doing this again, and we would love for you to return. And we would turn the platform over to you. The stage would be yours. Anything you'd like to do. I want to say thank you for your time today.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bless you.